Italy, a name that echoes through the ages, doesn't it? From the might of Rome to the brilliance of the Renaissance, this peninsula has been, well, a crucible of Western civilization.
It really has.
For this deep dive, we're embarking on a journey across millennia, pinpointing the major turning points and defining characteristics of Italian history, all drawn from the rich sources we've explored. Our aim is to give you a real understanding of this incredible historical arc.
Exactly. We're covering an immense span, from the first traces of human presence tens of thousands of years ago, right up to Italy's pivotal role in today's European Union.
That's huge.
It is. Our mission is to equip you with a solid grasp of this long and fascinating story, highlighting the essential factors and cultural developments without, overwhelming you with detail.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting at the very beginning with ancient Italy. Our sources indicate that human beings have been on the Italian peninsula for a truly significant stretch of time, somewhere in the range of 30,000 to 40,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That's mind-boggling.
It is. And what's a key insight here is that Italy wasn't just some landmass on the map. It acted as a vital corridor for those early human migration waves spreading out from Central Europe.
Ah, so a thoroughfare almost.
Pretty much, yeah. So it was a dynamic area of movement and settlement during those formative periods.
And when we talk about the arrival of farming, that major shift we call Neolithization, for anyone unfamiliar, that's the period when agriculture really takes hold. It wasn't a single event.
No, it looks like there were independent processes unfolding along the Adriatic and Tyrrhenian coasts, but with a strong influence coming from those pioneering Anatolian farmers.
Interesting. So multiple starting points, kind of?
Precisely. If we look at the bigger picture through the lens of genetics, what's fascinating is that the spread of these early farmers across the Mediterranean seems to have played a crucial role in creating a more uniform genetic makeup in the Italian populations of that era.
So a blending effect over time.
You got it. Millennia of migration and interaction literally wove a complex genetic fabric across the peninsula, highlighting that Italian identity isn't a single static thing, but a blend of ancient influences.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The late Neolithic and Middle Ages sound like a real crossroads, what one of our sources calls a complicated tapestry of cultural strata, with all sorts of population movements. We're talking about the Illyrians moving into what's now the Eastern Alps and the Celts migrating into the Po Plain. It sounds like a very dynamic place.
Absolutely. And this constant ebb and flow of people, including trade and the expansion of various groups, significantly shaped Italy's genetic composition as we understand it today.
Right.
Then, of course, comes Romanization, which led to the assimilation of the various Italic tribes, the gradual fading of those pre-Roman identities, and the emergence of those distinct regional characteristics we still see in Italy.
Right. And those genetic studies we mentioned earlier really support this. There's clear evidence of a genetic gradient from north to south within the peninsula. And the unique genetic heritage of Sardinia has been confirmed. Interestingly, though, when we look at mitochondrial DNA, which, just to clarify, traces the maternal line, it seems remarkably consistent across the peninsula.
Which raises a really important question, doesn't it, about the different roles that male and female lineages played in shaping the population's history.
Oh.
Studies focusing on Y chromosome diversity in continental Italy and the Y chromosome tracks the paternal line offer further valuable insights into the male side of this complex story.
Moving even further back into the Paleolithic, that's the Old Stone Age and the Neolithic periods themselves, it's quite something to realize that Italy was continuously inhabited even through the last glacial maximum, which was around 8,000 years ago.
Quite something.
We even have significant Paleolithic sites like the Fumane Cave and the Marcy Caves, offering glimpses into that very distant past.
And what's fascinating to consider alongside these early settlements is the incredible megafauna that roamed Italy during these times. Think woolly mammoths, mastodons, those are like the mammoths' cousins.
Yeah.
Woolly rhinoceroses, and those truly spectacular giant deer. Even Neanderthals were present.
Giant deer.
Yeah. Some of these massive creatures disappeared with the warmer climate at the Holocene, but incredibly, the giant deer managed to survive into the later Neo-Neolithic period. Imagine seeing those.
I can't even picture it. And the landscape itself was undergoing dramatic transformations. Our sources describe a real shift in pollen records, indicating that forests of oak and hazelnut gradually replaced the open treeless tundra steppe as the climate warmed up after the Ice Age.
Yes, and as time progressed, we see the expansion of other deciduous trees like hornbeam and lime, alongside the spread of coniferous forests in the Apennine Mountains, that central spine of Italy.
Okay.
By about 4,000 years ago, the vegetation had transitioned to something much closer to the park-like landscapes we associate with Italy today.
Now, you simply can't talk about Italian history without acknowledging its distinctive geography. It's this long, slender peninsula, right?
Exactly.
Dominated by the Alps in the north, then rolling hills and plains in the center, and more mountainous terrain as you head southeast and southwest. And of course, we can't forget the major islands, Sicily and Sardinia, each with their own unique character.
Absolutely. The mountainous and coastal nature of Italy's geography has been an incredibly powerful force shaping its cultural history, particularly during the spread of Greco-Roman culture.
Makes sense.
And it's worth remembering the sheer depth of the Mediterranean Sea, plunging to over 4,000 meters near those major islands. This geography has really carved out distinct regions and influenced how people lived and interacted.
Okay, so let's fast forward a few millennia and we encounter the Etruscans. This agricultural society initially formed these small, family-based villages, but then they started to coalesce into larger settlements, which our sources refer to as gratici, think of them as fortified hill towns, and they even attempted to create leagues or confederations for mutual defense.
And what's interesting to note here is that while they tried to build these defensive alliances, ultimately only 12 of the stronger settlements managed to endure, while others were lost to attacks.
So survival of the fittest, almost.
In a way, yes. It's within this fragmented but evolving landscape that Rome itself began to emerge, initially as one of these Etruscan towns, although it proved to be one with a particularly advantageous location and a knack for attracting other settlements and growing in importance.
The Etruscan language itself remains a bit of an enigma, doesn't it?
It really does. We have some understanding, and we know they used a script that was unique to them. They were clearly skilled in various arts, including writing, prophecy, which was quite significant in their culture, and various crafts, especially those intricate stone tombs they left behind.
Right, those tombs are amazing.
They also practiced a polytheistic religion with a number of important goddesses, and they were quite advanced in areas like sculpture, particularly in bronze, metalworking in general, and they were likely skilled navigators as well. Their belief in an underworld, which our source calls Navlachajos Fijetu, adds another fascinating layer to their culture and beliefs about the afterlife.
And it seems like women might have held a more prominent role in their society compared to some of their contemporaries, with this figure known as Arkashina mentioned in some contexts.
That's a possibility the sources raise, yeah. They certainly had a complex pantheon of powerful gods like Zeus, Phiva, and Fu, and archaeological evidence points to the existence of sacred houses and influential leaders. So, a sophisticated society indeed.
This rich Etruscan background really sets the stage for the ascent of Rome. Following the overthrow of their kings, Rome established a republic, organizing itself with various assemblies and political functions. Our source highlights that there was a degree of democratic participation, particularly linked to those who cultivated land.
And this new republic was explicitly designed to prevent the rise of tyrannical rule. They deliberately rejected the idea of a single, all-powerful king, opting instead for elected magistrates who held power alongside the Senate.
And you had to have experience to get elected, right?
Typically, yes. Individuals usually needed prior experience, whether in the military as an ex-commander or in civic life as an ex-tribune, for instance.
What's truly remarkable is the evolution of the Senate. Initially, it served primarily as an advisory body to the magistrates, lacking full legislative, judicial, or direct political control.
But it grew in power.
Hugely. And Rome itself, starting as a relatively small city-state around the 8th century BC, embarked on this incredible journey of expansion, eventually controlling a vast territory stretching up to 1,000 kilometers in every direction. That's a massive sphere of influence.
It absolutely is. We're talking about control over Egypt, the Maghreb region of North Africa, and even parts of Germania.
Wow.
And under influential figures like Scipio the Elder and later Augustus, the Mediterranean Sea truly became, as the saying goes, a Roman lake, entirely under their dominion.
Managing these extensive conquered territories required a highly organized and sophisticated administration, relying on appointed governors and a large body of civil servants.
Right. And the Romans were also very aware of historical precedent. They actively studied and learned from the experiences of earlier powers, like the Greeks, to develop effective methods of governance and maintain their vast empire. They were learners.
And then, of course, we transition into the iconic era of the Roman Empire, traditionally said to have been founded in 753 BC on the Palatine Hill.
Right, the legendary founding.
It grew from that single settlement to become not only the dominant city within Italy, but a major defining influence across the entire Mediterranean world and a significant portion of Europe.
For centuries, Rome stood as the largest city on the globe, boasting incredibly advanced amenities for its time, like extensive public bathing houses and those remarkable aqueducts that brought fresh water from miles away.
The aqueducts are just staggering engineering.
Totally. They also developed sophisticated diplomatic practices, a system of ambassadors to navigate international relations, and that famous complex pantheon of gods and goddesses. Roman law and philosophy became foundational for Western thought.
They also achieved mastery in a wide range of disciplines: mathematics, astronomy, impressive architectural feats, a rich literary tradition, and the art of rhetoric, all while successfully conducting military campaigns against those they termed barbarian invaders and incorporating vast swaths of territory into the empire.
Yeah.
It's an astonishing legacy.
The Roman Empire was indeed a highly civilized society, marked by grand public architecture and elaborate private villas. Their principle of equitas, which encompasses ideas of equity and fairness, is particularly noteworthy.
What did that mean in practice?
Well, it suggests a commitment to the rule of law applying to all citizens, a degree of representation, local autonomy within the empire, and even some recognition of rights for the peoples they had subjugated. It wasn't a perfect system, of course, but the ideal was significant.
But our sources also touch upon the inevitable period of decline. The figure of Hannibal, whom some historians like Fabius Maximus even called the Invincible, is mentioned as an early threat.
A major challenge, yeah.
We also hear about a neglect of traditional Roman religion, the flight of the wealthy patrician class from the city, and those devastating sieges and sacks of Rome by various barbarian groups.
Right. The Visigoths, the Vandals.
One account even specifically points to the destruction and disrepair of those vital aqueducts, a real symbol of their earlier power.
Yes, by the time of those later invasions, a significant amount of crucial infrastructure had fallen into disrepair or been deliberately destroyed. This stands in stark contrast to the earlier might and technological sophistication that characterized the peak of the empire.
A slow crumble, then a fall.
It paints a picture of a gradual weakening from within and increased pressure from without.
Okay, so that brings us to the Middle Ages and the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire. Our sources highlight the beginning of significant migrations from Central Asia around 376 AD, which really set off a domino effect of invasions across Europe, including into Italy.
That's the key day, yeah. By the end of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had effectively collapsed. The initial push of the Huns was followed by waves of Germanic migrations, including the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Burgundians, and Franks.
A lot of movement.
And even Slavic groups made their way into Italy during the 5th and 6th centuries. In a way, Italy became a place of refuge, albeit a turbulent one, for people fleeing the chaos in other parts of the former Western Empire.
And this period marks a really early and important connection between the Christian Church and the growing political influence of the papacy.
Definitely. Even the conversion of the Frankish king Clovis to Christianity was seen by the Bishop of Rome as a significant opportunity to expand the church's reach and influence.
So seizing the moment politically.
You could say that. What's a key insight here is the shifting balance of power. The eventual fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, centuries later, ironically led to the Western powers, including the papacy, gaining control over some territories in the east, such as Haifa and Jaffa, and the alliance between Charlemagne and the papacy, which led to the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, really cemented the religious legitimacy of Western European power, often at the expense of the Byzantine East. Rome strategically positioned itself as a kind of mediator between these two worlds.
There's also a brief but quite pointed observation in our sources about how the medieval world, with its organized Christian barbarity, a strong phrase, often seemed a far cry from the original teachings of Jesus. And the division of the Roman Empire after the death of Emperor Theodosius between his sons, with Honorius taking Italy and Arcadius taking Greece, really formalized their long-term separation into distinct spheres of influence.
Following the definitive collapse of the Western Roman Empire, Italy entered a period of significant fragmentation. The Adriatic coastal areas and much of the north came under the nominal control of the Eastern Roman emperors in Constantinople, while various Germanic and other groups carved out their own territories in other regions.
And the Goths sacked Rome.
Famously, yes. leading to a period of significant destruction and pillage. Then came the Lombards, another Germanic people, who settled in northern Italy and gradually wrested control of a large portion of the peninsula away from the Eastern Empire.
But amidst this ongoing chaos and shifting power, the papacy, with its core landholdings around Rome, gradually began to acquire temporal or worldly political power in addition to its spiritual authority.
Right, this is crucial. The Frankish kingdom, which eventually rose to prominence in Western Europe, played a critical role in bolstering the papacy's position. After defeating the Lombards, the Franks became protectors of the papacy.
A key alliance.
And Frankish kings were even crowned as emperors by the Pope, solidifying this mutually beneficial relationship. In return for this protection, the papacy was able to consolidate and expand its landholdings and influence in central Italy, a process that had its roots in the earlier donations attributed to Constantine.
After a period of internal struggles and perceived decline, the reform movement spearheaded by Pope Gregory VII in the 11th century really revitalized the papacy and restored its moral authority within the church.
A major turning point. The popes increasingly became the undisputed leaders of the Western Christian world, and some of Gregory VII's advisors even harbored ambitions of establishing a vast theocratic empire under papal authority.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Very. This era of growing papal power was followed by further political fragmentation within Italy, particularly with the rise of the Hohenstaufen emperors and the challenges they posed to papal authority.
So conflict continued.
Oh, yes. Simultaneously, Eastern European nations faced the devastating impact of the Mongol invasions, and the papacy itself became embroiled in the internal Italian conflicts between the Guelphs and Ghibelline.
Right, those famous factions.
The excommunication of Emperor Frederick II, for example, significantly weakened the prestige of the Church within the Holy Roman Empire.
Ultimately, this long period of disintegrating central authority and the corresponding rise of numerous local powers, despite the often fractured nature of the peninsula, really laid the essential groundwork for the eventual emergence of the more localized political landscape that would characterize Italy in the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
Exactly.
And it's a crucial precursor to the eventual formation of a unified modern Italy.
Our sources also delve into the nature of feudalism in Italy during this period, emphasizing the lack of a strong, centralized authority comparable to the later Kingdom of Italy. Unitary states, in the modern sense, simply didn't develop in the same way.
So much more fragmented.
Very much so. Italy operated under a more communal and independence-based system, characterized by numerous local leaders, often referred to as primates in our sources. We do see the development of representative institutions, but their primary function was often judicial, rather than focusing on unifying markets or acting as diplomatic entities on a larger scale.
The birth of Italy, as our sources suggest, was a surprisingly religiously neutral process in its initial stages, more about accommodating the diverse entities on the peninsula through political, sacred, and dynastic connections, rather than a unified religious identity.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Feudalism did take root in Italy, but its growth was closely tied to the history and development of the individual cities and was perhaps not as early or as systematically implemented as in places like France and England.
How did the nobles fit in?
Nobles in Italy often acted as either independent sovereigns in their own right or as vassals of powerful cities, sometimes even holding smaller vassal cities themselves. The strength and influence of the nobility varied considerably from region to region.
Leading to conflict, I imagine.
Constant feuds and power struggles, yeah, particularly with the growing and increasingly powerful cities that often had capable leaders and well-defined legal systems.
Initially, the governing councils within these cities were composed primarily of noble representatives. These representatives, however, were expected to justify their decisions to the wider populace.
Their access to information was somewhat limited, though perhaps more readily available due to reduced costs of communication within the city. Noble representatives also played a role in bringing the concerns of the various craft guilds to the attention of these councils.
It sounds like a delicate balance of power existed, with the cities, despite their growing influence, potentially facing pressure or even noble blackmail, as our sources suggest.
It could be. Conversely, these burgeoning free city-states drew inspiration, in part, from the long-distant decline of the Roman Empire, blossoming into largely autonomous governments run by increasingly wealthy and influential merchant elites.
Ah, the rise of the merchants.
Exactly. While initially often in opposition to the traditional nobility, over time, patrician families often gained significant bureaucratic control within these city-states. This urban environment also fostered the emergence of scholars and poets from various cities, contributing to a vibrant intellectual landscape.
This predominantly city-based system proved quite resistant to complete noble takeover, even though the nobles themselves sometimes formed their own guild-like associations to protect their interests.
True. Initially, the complex governance of these urban centers was often managed by an annual rotation of senior citizen representatives, a system designed to avoid the concentration of power in the hands of potential warlords.
But that didn't last forever.
No. As time progressed, these representatives sometimes became more ambitious, leading to internal conspiracies, power grabs, and exiles of political rivals. And in the period between 1300 and 1400, we see the rise of powerful courtiers who gain significant influence and wealth through the extraction of forced tribute from the surrounding cities, further shifting the political landscape.
That brings us to the transformative era of the Renaissance, that incredible rebirth of artistic, intellectual, and cultural energy that began in Italy in the 14th century.
Such a pivotal time.
It was fundamentally marked by a renewed and intense interest in the learning, art, and literature of the classical Greco-Roman world.
And what's particularly significant here is the growing association of civic achievements, especially in the creation of impressive public buildings adorned with sculpture and painting, with the names of individual artists.
Artists as celebrities, almost.
For the first time, yes. Artists began to achieve a level of celebrity and recognition for their individual talents.
While the Renaissance certainly built upon the accumulated knowledge and investment of previous centuries, it truly opened up entirely new pathways for artistic expression, the influence of which rapidly spread to other countries in Europe.
Absolutely. We see a greater emphasis on depicting natural landscapes, the incorporation of narrative elements into still life paintings, and a revival of classical subjects drawn from history, mythology, and allegory alongside traditional religious themes.
The burgeoning sense of civic pride within these Italian city-states heavily fueled individual artistic accomplishments. The development of formal artistic rules and education systems led to vibrant artistic communities.
What our sources describe as busy gatherings of painters, sculptors, and other artisans within specific urban centers or around influential courts. There was a remarkably rapid exchange of knowledge, techniques, and stylistic innovations among these artists.
The increasing availability and spread of manuscripts and later printed books, alongside the production of portable art forms like tapestries, allowed artistic ideas and styles to travel even faster than the artists themselves,
Spreading the Renaissance vibe.
disseminating these new Renaissance concepts across Europe and sparking similar movements elsewhere. We even see the emergence of what's termed proto-Renaissance art in the preceding centuries, with figures like Duccio paving the way.
And sculptural innovations like those of Donatello with his dynamic Mercury and his emotionally powerful Saint Mary Magdalene pushed the boundaries of artistic expression.
It's also fascinating to note the prevailing belief during this period that images themselves could somehow carry predictions or hold deeper meaning even before they were closely examined.
Yeah, that highlights the significant power attributed to visual representation in the Renaissance worldview. It wasn't just decoration.
Our sources also discuss a later cultural flourishing that was closely connected to the unification of Italy in the 19th century, the Risorgimento.
Right, another key period.
This period of national awakening spurred a significant output of visual arts, particularly in newly unified Rome and other major cities.
Early artists of this period often presented Italy through a lens of nostalgia, whimsy, and moralizing narratives, often idealizing views of the Italian landscape and people.
Kind of romanticizing it.
A bit, yeah. However, as the 19th century progressed, artists increasingly turned their attention to the contemporary realities of the time, focusing on the wars of independence and the significant political and social changes sweeping the peninsula.
So art reflecting life more directly.
Exactly. The very act of unification fostered a stronger sense of national consciousness, and Rome's role as the new capital led to its growth as a major European center.
Foreign artists who found themselves in these newly integrated Italian territories, places like Venice, the former kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and Rome observed a more decentralized pattern of urbanism and a diverse range of civic traditions, often stemming from colonial or pre-colonial eras.
Which was quite different from the more centralized models they were accustomed to.
These foreign artists, skilled in the visual language of European high culture, brought fresh and often insightful perspectives to Roman society.
And Italy's rich artistic heritage and natural beauty also deeply inspired sympathy among many foreigners for the Italian people and their aspirations for unification.
So art influenced politics.
In a way, yes. Many actively supported the movement to liberate various parts of Italy from foreign rule and unite them under a republican form of government. Artists of this era explored these complex political themes through a variety of artistic genres, from history painting to genre scenes depicting everyday life.
There's a particularly compelling example in the work of the sculptor Vincenzo Gemito, notably his piece The Water Carrier, which really embodies the tension between contemporary artistic trends and the enduring influence of classical forms.
Yeah, Gemito's interesting. In contrast to the idealized and often static forms of neoclassical sculpture, his work often features more dynamic poses and depicted informal, everyday subjects. Some believe they were even modeled on street urchins,
Really?
directly engaging with the social issues of his time while still subtly referencing classical sculptural traditions.
The Renaissance itself, a period spanning roughly from the 14th to the 16th centuries and originating in Florence, gave rise to a truly remarkable array of key figures.
An explosion of talent.
We're talking about literary giants like Giovanni Boccaccio, often hailed as the father of pure Italian prose, and Francesco Petrarch, who essentially invented the sonnet and is widely considered the first modern man due to his focus on human potential.
And his admiration for classical learning, yeah. And then you have visionary thinkers like Giordano Bruno, a poet, mystic, and esoteric philosopher who dared to propose radical theories about the universe, aligning with Copernicus.
And paid the price for it.
Tragically, yes. Martyred by the Inquisition. And, of course, the titans of art. Michelangelo Buonarroti, a master of seemingly all artistic mediums whose work embodied a powerful combination of beauty, spirituality, and strength.
Just breathtaking work.
And who was considered by many to be the pinnacle of Renaissance achievement and perhaps the best of humanity at that time.
We can't forget Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate polymath astronomer, engineer, inventor, artist,
The list goes on.
who left behind a profound intellectual legacy, what one source describes as a civilization founded on experiment, man, and nature, a figure who truly embodied the complexities and ambivalences of humanity.
And Raphael Assanti also stands as a crucial figure, considered a successor to both Michelangelo and Leonardo, completing the great cycle of painting in Italy during this period. Even later artists like Michelangelo Bassano of the Venetian school, with his masterpiece Vanitas, contributed to the ongoing artistic dynamism. Later periods even saw the extravagant architectural and decorative styles that flourished under Philip II of Spain's influence in parts of Italy, and the dramatic Caravaggio movement of the 1620s.
This entire era is often seen as a true manifestation of the elite of mankind, a period of flourishing free thought and remarkable Italian innovation across numerous fields.
The Italian Wars of Independence and the eventual unification in the 19th century ushered in a new and distinct period in Italian art and scientific thought. Foreign interest in Italy's cultural heritage and its people intensified during this time, often shifting from pure admiration to a growing concern for the social and economic realities, including poverty faced by many Italians.
This growing awareness led to widespread sympathy for Italian national interests, extending from Greece all the way to the United States, with many artists even actively supporting figures like Giuseppe Garibaldi in the cause of unification.
Vincenzo Gemito is again highlighted as a particularly representative sculptor of this transformative period, focusing his artistic gaze on emotionally charged subjects, often depicting the struggles and distress of the laboring population, themes of death and grief.
Which wasn't the usual subject matter back then.
No, it sometimes puzzled his contemporaries who were more accustomed to classical or romanticized subjects. His work reflected the growing influence of contemporary realism, a movement already gaining traction in France with artists like Courbet, Daumier, and Degas, although this more grounded approach was often avoided by more traditional academic painters and sculptors in Italy.
So he was kind of pushing boundaries.
Definitely. While other sculptors of the time, such as Franzoni, Butti, and Canonica, also explored contemporary and allegorical themes related to death and mourning with emotional depth, Gemito's unique approach, which skillfully blended traditional techniques with a focus on pressing contemporary social issues, ultimately garnered him greater fame and recognition abroad.
His works displayed at significant international exhibitions, like the 1884 Salon in Paris, showcased both his incredible technical virtuosity and the powerfully expressive character of his subjects.
Like his depictions of a boy with a mischievous grin and a seated man with a suspicious gaze really captured character.
Later in his career, the works he sent to Italian exhibitions were often more modest in scale and material, frequently in terracotta or bronze, and often imbued with a droll or smiling quality, as seen in his piece, Dry Point.
Now we turn our attention to the complex and long-sought-after unification of Italy in the 19th century. Our sources emphasize that this pivotal moment was the culmination of a lengthy period marked by intense nationalistic fervor and a series of earlier, albeit often unsuccessful, nationalistic actions and uprisings.
Right, it didn't happen overnight. Napoleon Bonaparte played a somewhat paradoxical early role in this process. He managed to unite most of the Italian states into what was known as the Italian Republic.
Temporarily.
Although this unification was ultimately incomplete and was later dismantled by England following Napoleon's downfall, the subsequent Congress of Vienna essentially reversed much of this unification, dividing Italy once again into multiple independent states, many of which experienced varying degrees of internal political instability.
And Austria also exerted significant influence and direct control over a substantial portion of the Italian peninsula, a major obstacle.
Despite these setbacks and the refragmentation of Italy, the underlying desire for national unity persisted and even grew. Interestingly, our sources mention that King Frederick I of Prussia even expressed his desire to see a Europe where Italians were free and united.
Outside support, or at least sentiment.
The formal proclamation of Italy's unification finally occurred in 1861 under the leadership of King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia, marking a momentous occasion in Italian history.
Reflecting on the 150th anniversary of this unification, our sources discuss the lingering presence of irredentism, the desire to incorporate regions with Italian-speaking populations that remained outside the new kingdom.
Still an issue even after 61.
And the powerful idea that a land that generates an idea becomes a nation, highlighting the crucial role of intellectual and cultural movements in forging national identity. Unification itself is viewed as a critical proving ground for Italian culture and identity, initially perhaps more potent in the plano d'immaginazione, in the realm of the imagination, than in immediate practical reality.
Giuseppe Garibaldi, of course, stands as a central and iconic figure in the story of Italian unification. Our sources describe him as far more than just an individual. He became a powerful symbol, a driving force of a movement, a source of inspiration, and a key element of Italian national identity.
Absolutely. His instantly recognizable image, the red shirt and the flowing beard, captured the popular imagination and generated widespread enthusiasm for his volunteer red shirts.
They were famous.
Very. His contributions to unification resonated on an international stage, particularly across Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, and the success of the unification involved numerous factors in both diplomacy and warfare, with Great Britain playing a particularly significant role.
It's crucial to remember that these historical events and the actions of these key figures should always be understood within the specific context of their own time. While Garibaldi quickly became an almost mythical, idealized figure in the immediate aftermath of unification, later historical perspectives have offered more nuanced and human portrayals.
Yeah, history gets revised. Born in Nice to a Corsican father and a Genoese mother, Garibaldi eventually retired to his farm in Caprera, but remained a potent legend for both liberal patriots and nationalists.
Interestingly, our sources also highlight that Garibaldi was a socialist in his political leanings, deeply influenced by the ideas of thinkers like Saint Simon and Mazzini during his periods of exile.
Which isn't always emphasized. His core motivation was a strong desire to free the oppressed from their dominators, and he consistently advocated for honest and just governance and the ideal of human brotherhood.
The Kingdom of Italy was ultimately established through a combination of strategic military campaigns, skillful diplomatic maneuvering, and decisive political actions, primarily led by the King of Sardinia, first Charles Albert, and later his son Victor Emmanuel II, and significantly supported by the political acumen of figures like Cavour,
The statesman.
and the popular appeal of nationalist heroes like Mazzini and Garibaldi. Following unification, Turin served as the initial capital of the new kingdom, a symbolic choice reflecting Piedmont's leading role in the Risorgimento.
While it achieved its primary goal of unifying the peninsula, the Kingdom of Italy began to face various challenges and entered a period of gradual decline in the 20th century. In the aftermath of World War I, the territories of Trentino and Trieste, long desired by Italian nationalists, were finally incorporated into the kingdom,
The unredeemed lands.
along with the acquisition of some limited colonial holdings in Africa. The period of decolonization following World War II eventually led to the loss of these colonies and the formation of the fully independent Italian Republic as we know it today.
The official logo of the Kingdom of Italy featured a distinctive blue shield emblazoned with the emblem of the Savoy dynasty, the royal house that had spearheaded the unification.
Our sources also briefly touch on earlier periods, noting how the Renaissance and the subsequent Reformation had fractured the religious unity that had once characterized Europe, including Italy. Economic crises and the religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries also contributed to a decline in Milan's previous economic and political prominence.
Furthermore, central power within various Italian states had often been weakened by internal conspiracies and power struggles, leading to the flight of powerful families and a greater focus on artistic and literary pursuits as alternative avenues of expression and influence.
Literary works from this era, such as the Commentari di un Valdese, offer glimpses into naval battles and various aspects of Italian culture and society during these turbulent times.
However, the unification process was far from straightforward and faced significant challenges. Creating a true sense of unity, both in terms of territorial integration and economic life, remained a constant aim throughout the Risorgimento, but its success was geographically uneven.
Definitely uneven. The peninsula continued to be described by some as a mosaic of Caesaropapism, a complex interplay of secular and religious authority, and various vassal states with their own distinct traditions and loyalties.
Achieving genuine political unity required significant reforms to reconcile the various Roman Catholic churches and the overarching structure of the new kingdom, including navigating the delicate balance between the authority of the national parliament and the Pope's control over significant financial institutions and other forms of influence.
Yeah, the Roman question. Following the formal unification after 1860, the Catholic Church and its various institutions were often viewed by elements within the new Italian state as external powers that needed to be controlled or at least carefully managed, posing potential obstacles to the complete sovereignty of the kingdom.
This perspective essentially continued a long-standing tradition of tension between secular and religious authority, echoing the dynamics of the Counter-Reformation. Interestingly, our sources mention that Naples, with its own strong historical and cultural identity, initially refused to recognize Rome as the sole official center of Catholicism.
Regional loyalties were strong. Rome, however, was widely regarded as the ultimate origin and guarantor of jurisdictional legitimacy, a view that increasingly clashed with the 17th century push for a more unified Italian state and cultural identity.
The attempted abolition of the traditional court of Rome and the effort to replace it with a more Italian ecclesiastical structure based on the Ambrosian rite historically associated with Milan became another significant point of contention in this complex process of unification.
Shifting our focus to the 20th century, our sources suggest that outside of periods of significant upheaval like revolution and organized resistance, Italy has sometimes been viewed by external observers as a somewhat indistinct civil, social, historical, and cultural entity, almost a non-entity.
That sounds harsh.
It is, but it's a perspective mentioned. This tendency towards historicism, while perhaps overlooking the complexities of Italian identity, has had real-world consequences. It has unfortunately contributed to a climate where sensationalized narratives can gain traction and credibility, while more nuanced and fact-based analysis is sometimes met with skepticism or even seen as politically risky. But the fundamental truth is that Italy is a nation that embodies multiple historical layers, a confluence of diverse peoples, passions, artistic expressions, and scientific advancements. It's not simply the oldest existing state in Europe, it's a nation that remains, in many ways, a work in progress, constantly evolving.
Understanding Italy, according to our sources, requires a certain flexibility of perspective, an acceptance of internal contradictions, and even a consideration of seemingly improbable historical developments.
True. Despite long and concerted efforts, some fundamental societal challenges have proven remarkably persistent, and at times what appears as necessary indecisiveness has almost become an end in itself in the political sphere.
Italy's historical attempts to establish various forms of empire are also noted, with the observation that these efforts, though roughly contemporaneous with each other, ultimately saw their adversaries survive and often even thrive.
And there's a rather critical assessment suggesting that Italy's imperial ventures may have been less successful, perhaps even failing more completely, than comparable enterprises undertaken by other European powers.
Ouch.
Throughout its history, Italy has existed in various forms of statehood, from Napoleonic-era republics to kingdoms and other dominions, and our sources point out that cities within these entities have sometimes shown a remarkable tendency to agree on what, in retrospect, appear to be clear fallacies.
Interesting.
The very nature of Italy is described, somewhat starkly, as dyspathy, suggesting a lack of inherent widespread sympathy or fundamental equalities across its diverse populations and regions. While the individual cities retain their distinct identities and historical legacies, the overarching Italian state has often been met with less recognition or public trust than even local businesses or transportation networks.
Looking specifically at World War I, our sources indicate that there was an unlikely prospect of a major insurrection against the Allied occupation forces, or a widespread anti-fascist revolution in the immediate post-war period.
Right, the aftermath was complex. A generally conformist climate, fueled by the lingering effects of wartime terror and the absence of a unified and dominant opposition movement, led many anti-fascists to coexist, albeit uneasily, with fascists, while the occupying powers primarily focused on preventing a resurgence of a fascist-Nazi alliance.
Around the industrial confederation known as Confindustria, those who remained reticent or resistant to the Italian Social Republic, the fascist puppet state established by Mussolini under Nazi control, gathered, often facing purges and persecution.
And the significant societal shift marked by the collapse of what's termed the peasant civilization and the decline of traditional landowning classes in the spring of 1945 created a volatile atmosphere, leading to instances where the populace took justice into their own hands.
Rough justice.
Yeah. It was during this period that the first credible news of the horrific Nazi-fascist massacres began to emerge, although our sources note that these atrocities had, in fact, begun much earlier in the conflict.
And elsewhere in Europe.
In the Balkans, by the spring of 1943, secessionist movements within the Yugoslav monarchy were already taking shape and re-emerged with renewed vigor in the anticipated post-war reunification of the region.
Back in Italy, monetary security was publicly entrusted to Italian capitalists, who were generally expected to support a right-wing Gaullist political direction, leading to a somewhat unusual form of corporatist socialism in economic policy.
Yeah, a strange mix. The return to a more conventional financial system had an impact on the public profile of figures like the outgoing governor of the Bank of England, Montague Norman, whose thinking during this period was reportedly influenced by Zionist perspectives within a financial context.
Finally, our sources mention the hypothesis megali, the great idea, often associated with Greek expansionist ambitions, not as inherently a negative concept, but as something that could be understood within a broader Eurasian framework.
Right, looking at the bigger geopolitical picture. This perspective doesn't necessarily imply an affectionate subjectivity towards the diverse Austro-Italian populations, but rather a wider geopolitical consideration.
The international recognition of fascism in Italy began in earnest around 1934, culminating in 1936 with Mussolini's open support for the Filofascist movement in Spain.
This period marked a significant shift in Italy's understanding of imperialisms, initially focused on consolidating control in Libya and the Aegean, but by 1925, Mussolini had publicly declared Italian ambitions towards Dalmatia on the eastern coast of the Adriatic.
So, growing ambition, and the origins of fascism itself.
Traced back to aggressive street-level intimidation and occupation, the systematic suppression of fundamental rights, and the implementation of increasingly virulent racist ideologies.
There's even an almost darkly humorous anecdote in our sources referencing ironic attempts at French politeness expressed in the Romagnolo dialect, a regional dialect of Italy just before the pivotal Battle of El Alamein in North Africa.
Yeah, strange little details emerge. Among Mussolini's optimistic followers, there were predictions of completing Italy's task in the Balkans, a goal influenced by Turkey's stance on various Aegean islands, specifically by occupying the small island of Farmakonisi.
But it was wishful thinking.
Pretty much. A proposed New Deal by the fascist regime was seen as based on rather flimsy premises, even before a significant Catalan plane crash raised further doubts.
Our sources also touch on Mussolini's apparent desire for a sense of balance in international affairs, highlighting his ultimately failed diplomatic attempts in London, Paris, Sofia, and Vienna in the lead-up to the Second World War.
A lot of failed diplomacy. This period was marked by deep disappointment for him, a strong desire to find a solution that would avert further conflict and national ruin, and growing doubts about the effectiveness of bipartisan mediation efforts. The silent war revenge mention refers to the elimination of an old political adversary named Suman.
World War II brought about a failed attempt at significant internal reforms within Italy, known as the Decalogue of November, which ultimately came to naught. Mussolini was soon forced to abandon his ambitious mass action programs as the realities of the war began to bite.
Yeah, reality hit hard. Early in the war, Italy faced increasing international isolation and suffered a series of significant defeats of its military forces.
Italy's attempts at imperialist expansion in the Mediterranean, targeting French North Africa and British East Africa suffered unexpected and significant setbacks against British forces.
Despite these military failures, Italy is noted in our sources for making progressive strides in defining quantitative parameters, complexities, and procedures in the fields of labor organization and industrial mechanization.
So, some technical progress amidst the chaos.
Seems so. The cadastral law, aimed at creating a comprehensive land registry, is considered a high point of Italian state construction during this period.
The chief of staff of the Italian armed forces, Badoglio, reportedly planned consultation events to discuss potential reforms after an initial period of inactivity following Italy's entry into the war.
On the diplomatic front, the United Nations, influenced by figures like Roosevelt, King George VI, the Italian communist leaders Togliatti and Gramsci, and the socialist leader Treves, launched a campaign advocating for the return of regions that had been denied to Fascist Italy.
Causing friction with Germany.
Considerable friction, yeah. Germany viewed these demands as overly unilateral and presumptuous. While these efforts achieved some notable successes, they ultimately failed to end Italy's costly foreign adventures in places like the Dodecanese Islands and Tunisia.
The decisive British victories in North Africa, particularly in Libya, offered no real basis for meaningful peace negotiations.
None at all. Consequently, the United Nations Command decided to launch major military operations in Sardinia and southern Italy, with the strategic aim of pressuring the crucial Luters Strait and ultimately seizing Sicily, which was seen as a key Axis logistical hub in North Africa.
During this period, there were attempts to exert influence on various countries by dangling financial incentives, and a desire among some Allied powers to restrain these potentially destabilizing demands.
To undermine Axis appeal in the Mediterranean region, it was recognized that a more robust agreement with the Soviet Union regarding the Black Sea was essential.
What about Libya?
In Libya, where the prospect of long-term British occupation was a major concern for some, continued fighting combined with diplomatic apologies were seen as potential ways to mitigate severe repression of the local population. Interestingly, our sources highlight that anti-Semitism, which was a growing and tragic reality in Italy, was largely unknown in Libya, where Jewish communities were generally well regarded.
That's a stark contrast.
It is. As Italy's fortunes in the war declined, its very fate became a subject of intense debate and uncertainty both domestically and internationally. A significant Italian fleet, along with substantial air brigades, awaited orders in the strategic port of Taranto, highlighting Italy's remaining military capabilities even in the face of mounting losses.
In the immediate aftermath of World War II, 5 prominent Venetian families began the construction of the magnificent basilica, the S. Maria della Salute, that iconic domed basilica prominently situated on the Grand Canal.
A truly stunning building.
Under the provisions of the government land law. This basilica is famously illuminated on its annual feast day, a testament to Venice's enduring traditions.
Margaret, the widow of Girolamo della Kim, also successfully obtained permission to maintain her residence in a prestigious, noble area of Venice. Other noble Venetian families, including the Fristori, Francine, and Miraciendo families, are mentioned in our sources as being part of the plebes patrici, essentially, the lower ranks of the patrician class residing in the vicinity of St. Mark's Square, the heart of Venice.
The Basilica Santa Croce is also mentioned as being in the same general area. It was contemporary with S. Maria della Salute, built around the same time, but tragically fell into ruin after some 300 years of subsequent events and neglect.
Venice's exquisite beauty and profound historical memory are clearly highlighted in our sources, painting a vivid picture of this unique city.
There are evocative mentions of gondoliers gliding along the canals, the somewhat whimsical image of elegant polenta devours, perhaps a reference to refined Venetian cuisine.
Could be.
And a rather mysterious phrase, a corrupted duet, hinting at underlying social or political tensions. The role of sea marshals in supposedly deceiving men with intoxications and gaieties is also noted, suggesting a potential undercurrent of moral decay.
This disregarded warning, whatever its specific context, was apparently ignored by both the established nobility and those in lower patrician offices at the conclusion of a significant commercial war, suggesting internal divisions and a lack of heed to potential dangers.
Phoenicias, a city deeply dedicated to its patron saint, St. Mark, and likened by some to an earthly paradise, was, according to our sources, ultimately abandoned by some of its most insightful and perceptive citizens due to various mortifications or deep humiliations.
Interestingly, Cardinal B, a figure whose full identity isn't entirely clear from our immediate context, apparently didn't feel the need to acquire a grand palace specifically for artistic pursuits, as these endeavors flourished per day and not day and night in other locations, implying a vibrant artistic scene beyond the traditional centers of power.
Moving forward to the early 1980s, Northern Italy began a period of surprisingly rapid economic recovery. Our sources point to four key contributing factors.
Okay, what were they?
Firstly, labor militancy, which had been a significant force in previous decades, was notably weakened following the major Fiat strike in October 1980, a pivotal moment in Italian industrial relations.
Right, that Fiat strike was huge. Secondly, there was a distinct shift towards what are termed individual relations in the realm of industrial relations, mirroring to some extent the U.S. model. This involved greater company flexibility in areas like working hours and wage negotiations, moving away from more centralized collective bargaining.
Thirdly,
Industrial disintegration was employed as a means of managing capital-labor relations more effectively. Sector-wide collective bargaining agreements, which had been a cornerstone of the post-war industrial landscape, were largely abandoned in the wake of the Fiat crisis.
and finally,
The power of trade unions experienced a significant weakening during this period. The automatic indexing of wages to inflation was slowed down, a move that was drastically reinforced by a national referendum in 1985, boosting the confidence of businesses to invest.
this period of industrial restructuring, which had begun in the mid-1970s, unfortunately also led to the loss of over 1 million industrial jobs between 1981 and 1991, a significant social and economic upheaval.
A huge cost. However, this restructuring also paved the way for the creation of new, more skilled jobs in the burgeoning service sector and in small to medium-sized firms, particularly in northern and central Italy, leading to a more diversified economic structure in these regions.
It's important to note, though, that the 1980s were also a crucial year for declining real family incomes and a significant rise in public debt, largely due to high interest rates on government bonds used to finance budget deficits.
Right, the debt problem really ballooned then. The consistently low real growth rates of Italian companies further exacerbated the impact of the recession, despite efforts at mechanization after 1980 and an increase in output following the 9/11 attacks in the United States.
The large-scale job losses in some sectors eventually led to the formation of workers' collectives who banded together to create their own firms in an attempt to mitigate the economic hardship.
Turning to political changes, our sources offer a somewhat pessimistic view, suggesting that Italy's artistic relics, often admired globally, might ironically imply that solutions to its challenges lie with other nations rather than within itself. Italy is presented as the enduring, arcane symbol of the cradle of art, a powerful image, but perhaps one that overshadows its contemporary challenges. There's a rather enigmatic reference to music in Florence, and the growing influence of Teresa de Lisieux somehow increasing the horrid abyss of our Sphinx, a phrase suggesting deep, unresolved national mysteries.
Poor administrative practices are cited as contributing to the rise of unexpected and perhaps unsuitable symbols of power. There's also a somewhat accusatory mention of the grand plunder of Italian churches, hinting at potential corruption or mismanagement of cultural heritage.
Despite these challenges, our sources assert that the wellspring of memories and potential within the Italian peninsula is far from exhausted, and contemporary writers continue in their attempts to define and shape a cohesive national idea for the future.
The text also curiously mentions aeronautical surprises and reflections, though the context is somewhat unclear, as well as the significance of portraits and a questioning of outward festive joy masking underlying anxieties.
Finally, there are direct accusations leveled against unnamed Nessona Spacciatori, which translates roughly to big-nosed dealers, though their specific role and significance remain ambiguous. The eloquence and potential of this secret youth is contrasted with a perceived lack of ability or willingness to truly listen to their voices. Ultimately, these various experiences and contradictions are seen as leading towards a future for Italy that is different and as yet unknown.
Italy holds the distinction of being the birthplace of the first modern socialist party, the Italian Workers' Party, founded in 1892.
An early adopter, by 1900, socialists had successfully entered the Italian parliament, marking a significant shift in the political landscape. The Italian Socialist Party continued to grow in influence, becoming one of the largest socialist parties in Europe by the time of World War I.
Alongside this rise in socialist political power, Italy also saw a strong and well-organized farmers' movement, as well as the development of numerous agricultural cooperatives.
The period following the dissolution of the monarchy, the aristocracy, and Italy's imperial ambitions led to a relatively rapid process of socialization across various sectors of society.
Trade unions became increasingly active and powerful, fighting for fundamental workers' rights, such as the establishment of an 8-hour workday, paid holidays, maternity leave, and pensions.
These often intense labor struggles sometimes turned violent, with the formation of Red Guards in the northeastern regions of Italy as a more radical expression of worker power. Occupations of factories and even entire villages under the management of unions and cooperatives became common tactics.
Direct action.
In the pursuit of these rights, often unfortunately ending in clashes with police and the army, resulting in bloodshed. Social unrest intensified significantly from the spring of 1962 onwards, characterized by sit-down strikes and spontaneous wildcat strikes that were not always sanctioned by established unions.
While some unions actively resisted these more radical actions, others exposed the existence of what they termed mysterious unions, suggesting internal divisions within the labor movement.
Republic-wide clashes between workers and law enforcement continued sporadically from the late 1970s through the late 1980s, often fueled by economic crises such as the European monetary system crisis. These labor actions focused primarily on the private sector, encompassing a wide range of workers from traditional artisans to white-collar managers.
Workers in traditional unionized industries sometimes formed local independent groups, directly challenging the established union bureaucracy.
Occupations of workplaces and even union headquarters became relatively common tactics during periods of intense industrial action. However, in later years, there was a noticeable decline in both blue-collar pickets and more conventional white-collar union actions.
So, a shift in tactics.
Perhaps. While established unions underwent significant reshaping and adaptation, more localized and direct forms of industrial action, often outside the traditional union structures, persisted. The capitalist state also adopted a more aggressive stance in response to the ongoing recession and perceived radicalism within the labor movement.
Following the devastation of World War II, Italy, as a defeated and occupied nation, actively participated in the complex processes of economic reconstruction and the subsequent peace negotiations.
This challenging task was somewhat facilitated by the preparatory work undertaken by the United States and Great Britain, who largely viewed both Germany and Italy as defeated adversaries embodying the forces of evil in Europe.
The resulting peace agreements, remarkably, avoided imposing severely punitive economic sanctions on Italy, reflecting a broader Allied aim of reintegrating both the German and Italian people back into the fabric of civilized European society.
These agreements were seen by some as unprecedented and perhaps even difficult to enforce in the long term, but were nonetheless intended to establish a firm foundation for post-war stability.
In the immediate aftermath of the war, Italy understandably felt a sense of deep humiliation and subjugation under the Allied occupation. Recognizing the path forward, joining key European economic and financial organizations was seen as crucial.
Yeah, integration was key. This was highlighted by various proposals even before the formal signing of treaties like the Guadiana di Laia Agreement. Specifically, joining the European Economic Community, EEC, and the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, was viewed not as a way to ignore the difficult and toxic legacies of the war and fascism, but rather as a practical means of addressing these complex issues through cooperation and integration.
Initially, post-war Italy became part of a U.S.-led initiative, though its immediate impact proved somewhat limited.
A more pragmatic and realistic approach prevailed, focusing on the challenges of a Europe still deeply scarred by nationalism rather than primarily on the threat posed by the Soviet Union. The prevailing mindset was one of rebuilding society while operating within a system of social and economic coordination that in some ways still bore remnants of the pre-fascist era.
Italy thus found itself as part of a formally balanced international system that generally favored the reconstruction of post-war Europe.
The loss of Italy's colonial possessions following the war led to differing perspectives between the Soviet Union and the United States regarding Italy's future role in the Mediterranean and in European affairs.
But how did Britain see Italy?
From the perspective of London, Italy was no longer viewed as a significant Mediterranean competitor, but had instead become a loyal member of the NATO alliance, exhibiting unexpectedly rapid rates of economic growth in the post-war period.
Recognizing this new alignment, The Italian government explicitly requested that London jointly indicate which countries they believed would benefit most from joining these emerging European organizations, signaling Italy's desire for collective progress and integration.
The end of World War II fundamentally shifted the balance of power in Europe, with the United States and the Soviet Union emerging as the dominant global forces. The establishment of the United Nations and new European institutions aimed to create a sense of stability and balance within Western Europe.
Democratic Italy, after the fall of Mussolini's regime and the abolition of the monarchy, actively embraced this new order. It joined the Marshall Plan for economic recovery, became a founding member of the NATO alliance, and played a crucial role as a founding member of modern Europe.
Along with Germany and France, yeah. Notably excluding Franco's Spain at that time. Great Britain, while involved in parallel processes of post-war adjustment, ultimately chose a different path, gradually withdrawing from close continental integration.
And Italy saw an opportunity there.
Italian diplomacy astutely recognized and strategically exploited this hesitancy on the part of Britain, using it as an opportunity to increase Italy's own presence and influence in world affairs, particularly within the evolving European landscape. London viewed Italy in this new context not as a Mediterranean rival, as it had been in the past, but as a reliable and loyal NATO ally that was experiencing surprisingly rapid economic growth.
This shift in perception was significant for the future dynamics of European politics. The Italian government actively supported Britain's application to join the European community in 1961.
This move was partly intended to counter the more nationalistic stance of French President de Gaulle, and also to align with the preferences of the United States, which generally favored a broader European integration. Despite some initial caution in their communications with Washington, Rome subtly but firmly backed Britain's membership bid, noting their concerns about the potential for a single, dominant national bloc to emerge within the community if Britain remained outside.
The Italian delegation, led by Emilio Colombo, played an active and constructive role in trying to resolve the various negotiation challenges that arose in Brussels during Britain's application process.
However, when Britain finally joined the European community in 1972, the anticipated strong Anglo-Italian partnership did not fully materialize as some in Italy had hoped. Italy's decade of commitment to European integration was somewhat understated by Britain.
Symbolized by?
Perhaps best symbolized by what our sources wryly refer to as Signor Moro's decisive intervention about New Zealand butter, a seemingly trivial detail that reflected Britain's downplaying of Italy's broader contributions.
This downplaying was perhaps partially justified by Italy's own internal political and economic problems during this period, and a perceived lack of a clearly defined and consistently pursued international policy, which sometimes led to a sense of Italian inactivity within the EEC.
Italy, during this time, was sometimes referred to as the sick man of Europe, and the stability of its democratic institutions appeared to be facing significant challenges. Interestingly, Britain, despite finally joining the community, also didn't fully capitalize on its European role, often becoming characterized as the awkward partner.
Italy played a truly fundamental role in the very genesis of the European community, being one of the 6 original signatories of the Treaty of Rome in 1957, the foundational document of the EEC.
A crucial founder, it strategically positioned itself as a vital bridge between the Atlantic community with its strong ties to the United States and the core continental European nations. Italy often acts as a point of convergence for common interests among member states, and has frequently played a vital role in brokering compromises and facilitating agreements within the European Union.
From Italy's perspective, European integration was seen as a significant opportunity to overcome its own internal weaknesses and limitations through a strategic transfer of certain powers and responsibilities to the community level.
European policy became instrumental for Italy's modernization efforts, based on a willingness to renounce a degree of national sovereignty in exchange for the potential benefits of economic support and assistance from richer partner nations within the community. Italy's core policies within Europe have consistently centered on furthering the process of unification, promoting greater interdependence among member states, and advocating for the expansion of the rights and influence of all member countries.
As one of the 6 founding members, Italy initially held a limited number of non-permanent statuses within the early European institutions. However, its core rights of participation, including consultation on policy matters and involvement in decision-making processes, significantly influenced the agendas and outcomes of the community from its inception.
It's also worth noting that many key officials and state leaders who were present at the early formative meetings of the European community were indeed Italian, although their overall status and influence were perhaps somewhat lower compared to their counterparts from Britain, France, and Germany, the larger and more established European powers. The European Council, as a key decision-making body, has also evolved considerably from its initial structure and composition.
Italy's exit from World War I was initially met with a surge of patriotic fervor and a sense of victory. The popular phrase at the time was that wars can be lost, but victories are never forgotten, reflecting a desire to emphasize the positive outcome despite the immense costs and sacrifices.
But reality set in quickly. The subsequent fall of the Orlando government, the wartime leader, quickly led to a period of significant political instability and a widespread yearning for a return to a more normal and predictable future government.
In the immediate post-war period, Italy found itself confronting what our sources describe as the disorganized horde of a rapidly decaying Central European entity, the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Italy's primary aim was to secure a free hand in achieving stable and defensible Italian borders, and to effectively contain what was perceived by some as a dangerous and chaotic realm of monsters to its east. Our sources suggest that the old port of Fiume, the Statute of the Julian March, and other contested areas were seemingly left to the ongoing power struggles between the major Allied powers, highlighting Italy's somewhat precarious position in these negotiations.
The supposed coup d'etat by the military leader Cadorna against the Orsini government was reportedly thwarted, ultimately consolidating political power within Italy.
Finally, there are mentions of various agreements, such as the Sassari Agreement, the entry of Tuscany into the unified Italy, and divisions of specific territories, all of which suggest ongoing efforts to reassure financial stability and solidify the territorial boundaries of the newly formed nation in the complex aftermath of the war.
It's often wryly observed in travelogues and commentaries that Italians have a particular preoccupation with their rich and extensive past.
You hear that a lot.
Sometimes these observations even turn into accusations of a certain carelessness towards the present and an inability to fully focus on the future, almost lacking a clear sense of the passage of time and the differences between historical periods.
There may be some basis for these claims, rooted in a certain lyrical and reflective quality that seems to be characteristic of a civilization as old and deeply layered as Italy's. The prevailing political and intellectual climate in certain periods has indeed encouraged a greater focus on reflecting upon national destiny and historical legacy, rather than solely on the immediate concerns of individuals.
The return of an Italian scientific expedition in 1871, for example, was met with considerable fanfare and public celebration across various regions of Italy.
There was a tangible sense of sincere fervor in places like Tuscany, Emilia, Rome, and Naples, with streets adorned and public festivities held to mark the occasion.
Interestingly, artists in the second half of the 19th century increasingly shifted their focus from purely historical or mythological subjects to depicting the realities of contemporary life, including the wars of unification and the significant political and social changes of the era.
Traditional fairy tales and popular culture even began to give way to imagery more directly related to warfare, national symbols, and dramatic depictions of sunrises, perhaps symbolizing a new dawn for the nation. This shift in artistic scenery and focus had been gradually underway since around 1868, moving away from predominantly classical themes towards a more direct engagement with contemporary Italian realities and the formation of a national identity.
The traditional metaphor of heavy hearts is even reinterpreted in our sources, poetically described as weeds growing in gardens of beauty, metaphorically leading to griping murders with horrible lethargy, suggesting a deep-seated sense of national malaise despite the outward beauty.
Italian literature stands as a profoundly important expression of Italian identity, providing a crucial sense of territorial continuity across the peninsula, fostering linguistic unity through the use of a shared language, and contributing significantly to the development of a collective national identity over centuries.
Contemporary Italian literature continues this tradition while also reflecting the diverse cultures and identities that coexist within Italy, all expressed through a shared linguistic heritage and a common critical tradition.
Italian literature boasts a continuous and rich history, stretching from the classical Latin of antiquity through the various vernacular languages that developed in the Middle Ages, and ultimately culminating in modern standard Italian expressions. Integrating and understanding this long and complex literary history is seen as vital for the continued visibility and relevance of contemporary Italian literature on both the national and international stages.
One of the defining characteristics of Italian literature throughout its history has been the constant coexistence of different and sometimes even conflicting languages and forms of literary expression, from formal Latin to the various regional vernaculars, and eventually to the standardized Italian language.
Consequently, the very term Italian literature has carried a range of varied and at times contradictory connotations, reflecting this linguistic and cultural diversity. Literary traditions have evolved differently across the various languages and territories that comprise Italy, leading to the development of multiple Italian literatures, each shaped by its specific linguistic usage and regional national traditions.
This internal diversity is a key aspect of understanding the richness and complexity of the Italian literary landscape.
The Italian cinema industry has long been a significant force both domestically and internationally, producing a vast number of films and, at times, even holding near monopolies on certain genres of television fiction within Italy.
From its earliest days, Italy actively contributed to the very birth of cinema as a powerful means of artistic expression, from groundbreaking early experiments in motion pictures to the development of full-length feature films like the epic Cabiria.
Italian cinema boasts a remarkable lineage of internationally acclaimed masters across a wide range of genres, whose innovative approaches have profoundly influenced aspects of cinematic storytelling, the art of directing actors, and the adaptation of literary and theatrical works for the screen.
Italy is also home to numerous film education institutions located throughout the country, fostering a vibrant community connecting artists, critics, scholars, and historians of cinema.
As cinema rapidly gained popularity as a new form of mass entertainment and artistic expression, the Italian press of the time actively reflected on its ironical modernity and the powerful impact of its visual language, particularly the innovative use of wide shots and close-ups.
These new cinematic tools effectively erase the traditional boundaries of time and space, allowing for unprecedented depictions of complex themes like death, horror, and moral ambiguities.
Some contemporary commentators even suggested that these powerful visual representations could potentially overwhelm and fundamentally redefine the metropolitan soul, perhaps even freeing it from traditional national moral and ethical constraints, highlighting the perceived transformative and potentially disruptive power of this new medium.
The Italian peninsula's distinctive long and narrow geography, stretching some 1,200 kilometers from north to south, is largely bordered by the imposing Alps to the north and the vast Mediterranean Sea on its other sides.
It also includes several major islands, with Sicily being a particularly key strategic location connecting the eastern and western Mediterranean via the Tyrrhenian Sea. Other significant islands include Sardinia and Elba.
Italy's diverse topography includes high mountain peaks, such as those found in the Dolomites, as well as narrow coastal plains that widen significantly in the fertile Po and Vardar river basins.
A common Italian type of house can be observed across a wide area of the peninsula. These structures typically feature stone or brick construction, often used for their resistance to earthquakes, hipped slate roofs, often with dormer windows, showing some French and Swiss architectural influences.
The external walls are rarely treated or ornamented, and regional variations in architectural detail are common. These houses are typically 2 to 3 stories in height, with a living space ranging from approximately 120 to 250 square meters.
The ground floor of these traditional Italian houses is often primarily utilitarian in function, housing barns, animal stalls, cellars for storage, and featuring a characteristic arched entrance. They also often include hay and grain lifts for agricultural purposes. The living and sleeping rooms are typically located on the upper floors.
Front doors are usually double doors with small inset windows and wooden frames. A balcony, often with stone cornice and ridge, is a common architectural feature.
The second half of the 20th century in Italy saw a significant period of flourishing in the new political and social system established after the war, with art and literature experiencing a renewed sense of energy and purpose.
In the immediate post-war years, from 1945 to 1960, social realism was a dominant trend, and there was a strong communist influence, particularly evident in poetry, with notable figures like Sinisgali, Quasimodo, Pumini, and Gatto,
whose work was often characterized by its lack of pretension and direct engagement with social issues. Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa's posthumously published novel The Leopard, set in 1860 during the Unification, was seen by many as marking Italy's real birth as a nation, a kind of Homeric epic rendered in prose.
This period also saw an increased academic and popular interest in Italian folklore, with significant collections and translations of traditional stories and customs being undertaken.
There was also an intensified engagement with the classics, with Italian classical scholarship developing and evolving through lively debates and new interpretations. This stimulating interrogation of classical texts was unmistakably Italian in its approach and its concerns.
In the 19th century, Italy had experienced the decline of the Grand Tour, the upheavals of the Neapolitan Revolution, the dreams of restoration under the Holy Alliance, and the ultimately incomplete attempts at unification.
This period led to a shedding of earlier classical pride and further internal disintegration, leaving Italy feeling like a nation without a country after its imperial past had been largely dismantled. However, amidst this sense of desolation in the mid-19th century, roughly 1850 to 1870, an unquenchable yearning for national identity and unity grew within the Italian consciousness, powerfully articulated in the works of literary giants like Alessandro Manzoni and Giacomo Leopardi.
Gradually, the wounds of the past began to heal. Universities reopened their doors, printing became more accessible, leading to a growing audience for contemporary Italian writers and thinkers.
By the late 19th century, the epic and melancholic literary styles that had been popular earlier gave way to a greater appreciation for fairy tale humor and a noticeable obsession with childhood and children as subjects in literature, perhaps reflecting a hope for a brighter future.
At the turn of the 20th century, Italy underwent a dramatic transformation, shifting from a land of hope for many to something of a blank slate, a period of profound uncertainty and change.
There was a rapid and almost total collapse of the old established order. The monarchy, traditional civil institutions, and even the state itself seemed to falter, leading to a loss of traditional authority and a forgetting of the hard-won peace that had followed unification. Italian soil, so rich in history and cultural heritage, became surprisingly fragile in this tumultuous period.
It was, in a sense, conquered anew by the pervasive influence of Greco-Latin and Christian culture, a process likened to the cultural impact on pre-Columbian America, deeply affecting Italian semantics, morality, and overall worldview.
Italy's full integration into what was broadly termed Western culture during this era was likened to the public revelation of long-hidden societal issues and contradictions. Even after the Boomerang Revolution of 1641, the deep-seated power of nationalist symbols persisted within Italian society.
The social architecture for this period of change saw the rise of a new bourgeoisie, often composed of an uprooted upper class, who effectively managed property and the means of production.
The industrial waste product of this revolutionary period unexpectedly became a significant force for further change, gradually transforming itself into a Western-style bourgeoisie. However, this newly ascendant class often lacked a strong sense of historical legitimacy.
Needing to create a narrative.
Exactly. Requiring a reinterpretation of collective memory and an idealization of figures from Italy's past, ranging from Cortés, a somewhat surprising inclusion, to the more universally accepted national hero Garibaldi, to provide a sense of historical grounding. This process even subjected figures from Italy's historical pantheon to a kind of post-mortem prosecution, where their legacies were debated and reevaluated in light of the new national consciousness.
A period of relative social peace prevailed in Italy until around 1950, when the broader consequences of the Marshall Plan, the American Initiative for European Economic Recovery, began to become more fully apparent.
By 1955, Italian politics had become increasingly internationalized, with Italy actively preparing for its significant role in the burgeoning European community. Within a single generation, Italy underwent a dramatic societal transformation, shifting from a predominantly rural and artisan-based economy to a more urban and industrialized one.
This rapid change occurred under conditions described as unfettered social Darwinism, masked by the prevailing ideology of free enterprise. This period witnessed massive internal migration, with large numbers of people moving from the less developed South to the industrial North, and from rural areas to urban centers,
often with little consideration for the development of adequate social infrastructure to support this massive shift. Consequently, the inherent contradictions within the existing socio-economic system were significantly aggravated during this period of rapid industrialization.
Post-Reconstruction Italy was thus a complex mix of the old and the new, described somewhat poetically as both bourbon and electronic, juxtaposing the legacies of the past with the advancements of the modern age.
While Reconstruction did indeed allow Italy to emerge as a leading industrialized nation, the old ruling class often seemed solely focused on production and economic growth, sometimes at the expense of broader social considerations.
The period from 1960 to 1980 was marked by significant social conflicts, culminating in the widespread protests of 1968 and the subsequent years of lead, a period of intense political violence and terrorism.
These events highlighted the shortcomings of a purely production-focused perspective held by what was increasingly seen as an authoritarian ruling class. The political ruling class, during this turbulent time, often appeared more preoccupied with internal power struggles than with effectively mediating the growing social issues.
It's important to remember that these years of intense social and political upheaval both preceded and accompanied the significant economic boom that Italy experienced in the post-war era.
The 2008 global financial crisis had a particularly profound and lasting impact on the economies of southern European nations, with Italy entering a period of economic crisis that was unprecedented in its depth and duration compared to its own historical experience and the trajectories of its European partners.
9 years after the initial crisis, Italy continued to struggle to regain its pre-crisis levels of GDP and employment, showing significantly negative comparisons to the economic recoveries of countries like France and Spain, while Germany experienced substantial growth during the same period.
Many economists and analysts have attributed this slower recovery in southern European countries, including Italy, to the failure of prevailing economic policies. The implementation of tight fiscal policies during the crisis and the subsequent austerity measures imposed by the European Commission are seen by some as having inadvertently caused double or even triple-dip recessions and persistently high levels of unemployment.
Furthermore, many scholars have argued that the structure of the Eurozone itself, and Italy's membership within it, significantly limited the Italian government's ability to adopt more growth-oriented economic policies, such as devaluing the national currency or implementing more flexible fiscal measures.
However, the monetary policies of the European Central Bank, ECB, did lead to a lowering of domestic interest rates within Italy.
Italy presents a truly unique case study in international relations, shaped significantly by its geographical location and the long shadow of France's historical influence, a relationship that persisted for a longo periodo, a significant duration right up to the Second World War.
Today, Italy stands as a vital and integral ally within the Eurosystem, and French leaders recognize the crucial need for Italy's continued loyalty and cooperation within the European Union. France's historical complexities and occasional tensions with Italy coexist with a pragmatic recognition of Italy as a valuable utilitarian asset in the broader European context.
Our discussion has touched upon key points in Italy's long and multifaceted history, as well as its often vulnerable position within larger historical narratives. We've seen a shift in focus from the importance of borders and territorial integrity to the critical role of internal dynamics, particularly within the political and diplomatic arena.
The concept of exotic polymerisms is mentioned in our sources as sometimes confusing Italy's self-perception as a major power on the global stage. The first part of our analysis has largely covered Italy's early history and the parameters of its development as defined, in part, by French historical influence.
Our analysis of key past events has included the transformative Renaissance, a period marked by significant political and territorial division, often under foreign domination and the rule of powerful condottieri, as well as the relatively limited impact of the Protestant Reformation in southern Italy compared to other parts of Europe.
While Italian princes during the Renaissance were often highly cultured and patrons of the arts, they also frequently faced internal revolts and instability. Following the period of Garibaldi and the Unification, an exiled priest viewed the creation of a unified Italy with some discord, likening it to a dissonant Schönbergian note in the symphony of European history.
The second part of our analysis is focused more intently on the period of revolution and Italy's gradual and often arduous path towards unification in the 19th century. We've highlighted the complex military, diplomatic, and papal aspects that contributed to Piedmontese Italy's historical exclusion from certain European power dynamics.
Finally, the alliance between Pope Pius IX and the Piedmontese forces during a crucial period of unification is described in our sources as a paradoxical moment, reflecting the often complex and sometimes contradictory forces at play in Italy's long and fascinating history.
So to summarize our deep dive, we've journeyed from the earliest human settlements on the Italian peninsula through the monumental epochs of the Roman Republic and Empire, navigated the complexities of the Middle Ages and the transformative brilliance of the Renaissance,
Quite a journey.
explored the passionate struggles for unification in the 19th century, and examined Italy's turbulent 20th century, culminating in its present-day role as a key member of the European Union.
It's truly a historical narrative of incredible complexity and profound richness, isn't it? Italy's past is not just a series of events. It's a deeply interwoven tapestry that continues to shape its present identity and its significant role within the broader European landscape today.
And ultimately, it serves as a powerful reminder that history is not simply a static collection of dates and facts confined to textbooks, but rather an ongoing and dynamic process that profoundly influences and shapes the world we live in.
Absolutely.
Consider, if you will, how the long and often dramatic sweep of Italian history, with its recurring cycles of both fragmentation and unification, its periods of extraordinary cultural and artistic achievement, alongside times of intense political and social struggle, continues to offer invaluable insights into the enduring challenges and the persistent opportunities that face the nation in the present day.
Absolutely. And we strongly encourage you to delve further into any of the specific periods, events, or fascinating figures that particularly sparked your interest during our exploration today. There are always more layers to uncover and deeper understandings to be gained from this truly captivating history.